Hiya, Aisha again. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, well, give you a bit of background about Shabtis, a little about potted history of how they came about. And if you recall, Shabtis are funerary statues which were made in the likeness of the deceased, so that their purpose was to do the work required of the deceased person in the next world. So you're wealthy, you're royal, you have servants. You don't go and till your own soil and cook your own food. And so it is the same, they felt, in the underworld. And that's because the ancients believed the next world was very much like the world they lived in now, that their relatives and friends would be around them in the next world. So they would need servants, and they would need workers for the fields. The other thing they believed in was that, which I think is right personally, is that death is not the end. It is a rite of passage rather than the end. It takes you to the next level of your existence. And I honestly believe that, because nothing really dies, it simply changes. This practice of putting these little servants in to do the job that the deceased may be asked to do appears to have started as long ago as the Old Kingdom. And at that time, model servants, sort of models of servants, usually made of wood, were placed in tombs along with the deceased goods, so they could continue to grow food and wait on the deceased, these servants. Now, during the Middle Kingdom, it's getting closer to the birth of Christ, still quite far off, but there we are. During the Middle Kingdom, that's 2030 to 1960 BC, before Christ. I just see 1960 and I think, what? But it was before Christ. Now, that's equates to about the late 11th or 12th dynasty in the reign of the pharaohs. These worker models were gradually replaced by figures in a mummy form, which became known as Shaptis. That's in the Middle Kingdom when that word started being used. I don't know, it was a foreign word that was adopted. It could be, couldn't it? Which carried out any work needed to be done in the afterlife. The deceased usually had a Shapti made in his or her image or likeness. And if the deceased was called upon to do work that they didn't want to do, never done, for example, working in the fields to irrigate the land or to dig up and plant, then the Shapti would deputize, or could deputize, for the deceased person. Now, these Shaptis were usually provided for royalty and the wealthy, who were not called upon in life to do menial tasks. The belief was that the deceased became assimilated with Osiris, and in that way was brought back to life, as he was brought back to life. As I mentioned before, he was murdered by his brother Set, and his body parts scattered, and as Isis and the other god and goddesses, when she had found all the bits, helped her to put it together. But she was the most magical of all of them, and she was determined. So the belief was that when you die, you assimilated with Osiris, and thereby were able to live as well in the afterlife. So over time, even the peasants or commoners believed through Osiris that they, like the pharaohs, could also live again after death. Now, during the 18th dynasty, and that was from 1540 roughly to 1295 BC, the Golden Age, a time when there was plenty in Egypt because of all the other conquering nations that was sending tribute to Egypt. The Shaptis were identified as clearly having an agricultural role, both by the equipment and tools around them and by the inscriptions accompanying these worker beings. And those inscriptions included the tomb owner's name. Now, pharaohs, Shaptis, usually wore a urias, which is the same sort of headgear and protective ladies at the front, and other royal garments to persuade the gods of the underworld to accept the figure as the person whose name it represents. Now, all I can think of, because in my experience, gods are not easily fooled. They can never be fooled, to be honest. So the only thing I can think of is that everyone decided that this idea will be accepted by everyone. Because if you thought about it too deeply, it wouldn't hold water. What's important is that they believed it. And it was a long time ago. But interestingly, a woman's Shaptis was given a female appearance and female clothes, even though the work that they're representing as doing was done by a male servant. Now, this practice died out somewhere in that period. Yeah, the 18th dynasty. During the 18th dynasty, they changed the working method. So instead of having these male and female workers, what they decided then was that they provided an overseer as well as male and female workers. So the overseer had responsibility of ensuring that the work was done on behalf of the deceased and to a good standard. I love that. Let's pretend. It happens all the time. I mean, in this country, in England, we say we own the land we're living on, if we own it, but we don't own it. All land in the UK is owned by the Queen. Well, was. I don't know who owns it now. She's gone, poor bless her. Now, at the height of the fashion Shaptis being provided for the tomb, there were, according to excavation reports, these Shaptis were found at the head of the deceased, one on each side, outside of the coffin, or some were found inside the coffin, one on each side of the head. But in Tut's tomb, the figurines were found, because it was such a small tomb, it was found between the treasury and the annex, where everything was piled in. You had the burial chamber, the treasury, and the annex. That's all there was. So between the treasury and the annex, they found these Shaptis. There were 413 of them. And they were all housed in these little shrine-shaped kiosks. Can you imagine the fiddly job that was? Must have been. But they did it. It was all done. And there, what were Shaptis made of? Well, it depends on what you could afford. They could be made of bronze, ebony. I would imagine, I don't know, because I haven't actually seen the ones in Tut's tomb. I would imagine his would have been made of ebony. Or it could be a combination. I'll let you know when I find out. So Shaptis could be made of bronze, ebony, glass, marble, wood, or granite. Now we've come to the late New Kingdom. Now you're probably wondering what the late New Kingdom is. And I suspect that's just before the Romans invaded. Because that time, I don't know if you realise, but Alexander the Great, after the 18th dynasty, Alexander the Great had conquered Egypt at the age of 24, would you believe? And had set Ptolemy, a Macedonian person, on the throne of Egypt. So you had pharaohs that were Macedonians. And the last of those, which lasted about just over 200 years, was Cleopatra the Fifth, was the last of the Ptolemaic Macedonian pharaonic people. It was coming to an end, and they found that these little statuettes, the standard had gone right down because they were just mass producing them, and they were just for show more than anything. There was no art, real art form in them anymore. They were just being produced by the thousands, and they were referred to as Shaptis, Shapti, or the answerer. So you'd have the Shapti it was referred to as the answerer. That's what it means, answerer. So when the deceased was asked to do something, the Shapti would automatically answer and do it. But is another little interesting tidbit that the word Shapti does not appear anywhere in the ancient Egyptian text. So I've no idea where that's come from. I'm sure somebody out there knows, who's in the know. But it could have been a word that was belonged to one of their conquered states that they decided to use. I don't know. But anyway, that's your whistle top tour on Shanties. There is so much, but that'll have to do you for now. If you want to know more, you'll have to look it up yourself, love. I've had enough. No, I haven't really, but there we are. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you do, because if you make the time, you will enjoy it. And I think you'll enjoy the books even more by knowing a little bit of the background. But I'm signing off for now. This is Aisha, Dirge. Family know me as Cum. And ADP Cerisi, writer. Au revoir.